The newest update to Limbus company has given us a second apprentice identity to play around with, and this time it's none other than the Middle Apprentice, or Kira Ishmael. This unit is a long-awaited addition to the Envy Resonance composition, where other Middle identities reside. She also pretends to be Burn and Bleed and has a bunch of scaling effects, as well as bonus damage. And this raises the question, how good is Kira Ishmael, and should you get her? In this video I want to answer those questions and more, by first looking at her kit, and then checking out her performance in Bleed, Burn and Envy Resonance, in order to figure out where she's best used. But before we start, I have to remind you that most of my viewers are not subscribed, so if you find yourself coming back to my videos or end up enjoying this one, consider subscribing. It takes just 1 second and helps me out a lot. Now let's get to Ishmael. We'll start with her kit. Kira Ishmael has high health, an average speed roll and a +4 defense level. Her Sin Affinity spread consists of Lust, Wrath and Envy, with an Envy defense. All of Ishmael's skills gain coin power based on the enemy's Burn and Bleed. Her skill 1 is totally badass ass kicking. It rolls up to 13 and heals 5 SP on use. Its coins inflict 2 bleed, deal 5 bonus blunt damage, and inflict 1 bleed count if Ishmael has the middle styled augmentation tattoos. Her skill 2 is Crossing Dervish, and it rolls up to 19. At combat start, this skill gains offense level based on the highest resonance, up to 3, and if there was an absolute resonance, the gain is doubled. On use, Ishmael gets 5 aggro next turn, and if she has thermal blades, the first and second coins of the skill inflict as much burn as they do bleed. The coins inflict 2 bleed potency and 1 count, while also dealing 5 bonus blunt damage and inflicting 1 paralyze and 1 bind next turn if Ishmael has tattoos, up to 2 times per turn. Her skill 3 is Violet Breaking Slam. It rolls up to 23, gains offense level in the same way as skill 2 and interacts with thermal blades in the same way as well. On use, the skill gains final power based on Ishmael's grudge stacks, up to 3, and after attack, the skill consumes all grudge stacks and gives Ishmael 1 blunt damage up next turn if it was activated as a counter. The coins of the skill inflict a total of 3 bleed and 2 bleed count, and the 4th coin deals bonus / damage scaling with Envy Resonance. Ishmael's defensive skill is a counter. Normally it rolls up to 14, lowers Ishmael's stagger threshold and inflicts 1 bleed. But at combat start, if there's 6 or more Envy Absolute Resonance, skill 3 gets used as a counter instead, up to 2 times per turn. Also, Ishmael gains 25% of her missing health as a shield, once per turn. As for her passives, Kira Ish has 2. The first one is Thermal Weapon. It makes Ishmael count as both a Bleed and a Burn identity for mirror dungeon purposes, and makes her Bleed inflicting skills also be considered Burn inflicting skills when she has Thermal Blades. The second passive requires 3 Envy owned, and at turn end it applies Vengeance Mark to the enemy that dealt the most damage to allies this turn. Every time Ishmael gets hit, she gets 2 stacks of grudge, up to 2 times per turn, and when a different middle ally is hit, Ishmael gets 1, once per turn per ally. If the attacking enemy has Vengeance Mark, both of these effects give 1 more grudge. And at combat start, if there's an Envy Absolute Resonance present, the grudge gain is doubled for the turn. Also, Ishmael gains 1 stack of tattoos every time she consumes 5 grudge stacks with her skill 3, and at combat start, if there's a triple envy resonance and Ishmael doesn't have thermal blades, she gets that effect next turn, and if she does have it already, she gains extra thermal blade stacks based on envy resonance. As for her support passive, it requires 3 Envy Resonance and gives the first deployed ally 1 Clash power on their base attack skills, and also makes them deal 10% more damage if there's Envy Absolute Resonance on the dashboard. Before getting into Ishmael's performance in her teams of choice, we also have to look at her unique effects. Thermal Blades stack up to 2, and heal 3 SP for Ishmael up to 2 times per turn when hitting an enemy with Burn. The effect also allows Ishmael to inflict burn with her skills, and it loses 1 stack at turn end. The Middle Grudge stacks up to 15, and as long as Ishmael has any amount of this effect, she deals 20% more damage to targets with Vengeance Mark. And the Middle Styled Augmentation Tattoos stack to 10, give 1 final power for every 5 stacks, and make Envy and Blunt skills deal 5% more damage per stack. With this, we can move on to Ishmael's performance in combat. First, let's look at her overarching win condition and mechanics, before we start talking about status teams. Kira Ishmael is a middle identity, meaning she is closely tied to Envy Resonance, just like all the other middles. Her skills deal respectable damage once she stacks up some of her effects, but the real bread and butter of this identity is her counter. When used at 6 Envy Absolute Resonance, Kira's counter turns into her skill 3, allowing you to spam the strongest skill of this identity over and over again, eliminating the need to cycle through her much weaker skills 1 and 2. This is the same gimmick that Middle Dawn and Middle Sinclair have. But unlike Middle Sinclair, Ishmael can't also get extra skill 2s from Quadruple Resonance, so she falls back to the older all-or-nothing type of gameplay Middle Dawn has. Speaking of other middle units, Kira's long-term stacking is very similar to that of Sinclair. Whenever she or her allies get hit, Ishmael creates a resource, and when she hits an enemy, she consumes said resource to turn it into a scaling buff. In the case of Sinclair though, he can cash out with any skill, while Ishmael needs to specifically hit the enemy with her skill 3. Luckily, she can create those out of thin air, so it's not an issue really. Of course, tying Ishmael to such a mechanic makes her shine in longer encounters, where she gets to scale up her damage, as there's a whole 50% dynamic modifier as well as some power hidden behind the Augmentation Tattoos effect. On the flip side, unless the enemy is envy weak, Ishmael won't do all that much in a short fight. One important thing to note with this ID is that whenever you turn Ishmael's counter into a skill 3, the shield that's supposed to activate at combat start does not seem to actually appear. This is weird because it can be explained by the skill swap effect happening before the shield check goes through, but Sinclair's counter has the exact same wording and effect order, and it still works as intended. I'm not sure if this is intended or a bug, so maybe it might get patched. If it doesn't though, Kira Ishmael is definitely pretty squishy for a unit that wants to get hit to grow stronger. These are the basics of Kira Ishmael, and now I want to look at her performance in the 3 teams that she says she is made for: Bleed, Burn and Envy Resonance. We'll start with Bleed. Bleed has historically been the keyword that accompanies identities from the middle, and historically, these identities have been really bad at actually applying it. Ishmael, however, breaks that tradition, as for the first time in the Middle history, an identity from this faction actually has bleed count. And Kira doesn't just have some count, she actually inflicts bleed count on every single skill in her kit, with her skill 3 inflicting 2 at once, which is pretty nice. Ishmael also gets a last skill 1, which is useful, as the bleed team plays around last resonance, with many units requiring a double, triple, or even quadruple resonance to activate their passives or interact with their unique effects. But this is where the good parts end. See, while Ishmael performs at an above average level compared to other middle identities in terms of bleed infliction, there's a much more relevant comparison at hand. Ishmael, as a sinner, has the Kurokumo clan captain identity for the bleed team. That unit not only inflicts more bleed on her own using her Dark Cloud Blade effect, but she also gives out the Dark Cloud effect to other Kurokumo allies, making them inflict more bleed as well. This makes Kurokumo Ishmael an absolute cornerstone of bleed infliction in the team, and Kira simply does not stack up. On the damage side of things, it's not looking too great either, as Kurokumo has the bleed activation effect on her skill 3, which adds extra true damage to it, while Kira doesn't even get to utilize her main gimmick due to the lack of envy resonance in the bleed team. Suffice to say, Kira Ishmael does not go on the bleed team. You can also look at her count as an attempt to actually keep up a bleed stack in the envy team, in order to activate coin power conditionals for Middle Sinclair, as well as Ishmael herself. However, the addition of Ishmael is only one step, and that one step is far too small to scale the absolute wall that is the rest of the envy team. No unit outside of Ishmael provides any bleed count, so having just one ID actually trying to do something with it is simply not enough to salvage the stack. Though if we keep getting more identities like Ish, this issue might get resolved eventually. So while on her own Kira does not save the bleed stack in Envy, she does set a new standard that future identities will hopefully meet. As for Kira Ishmael in Burn, it's kind of over for her. Ishmael is a bleed identity at base, which allows us to talk about her positively in that team at least a little bit. But all of her burn is locked behind getting a triple envy resonance, which is the only way to obtain thermal blades, the effect that actually turns Kira Ishmael into a burn identity. Now technically, you can get a triple envy resonance in burn, as a standard burn team can run Liu Yisang and Yu Heathcliff, two units with envy skills. However, in the case of Yisang, his only envy skill is his skill 3, which you get to see exactly once every rotation. This isn't helped by the fact that thermal blades are locked behind a passive that requires 3 envy owned, meaning, at best, Ishmael will start inflicting burn on turn 4, with 2 turns needed to accumulate 3 envy resources, and then an envy resonance on turn 3, which gives thermal blades on turn 4. Then, after you get thermal blades, you have 2 turns to enjoy them, and then you have to wait for another Liu Yisang skill 3. Suffice to say, Ishmael is not exactly a functional burn identity yet. See, this Identity's update story teased Otis in the role of the middle nurse father, and we know that she will be another unit similar to Ishmael. With her eventual addition, Envy Resonance chains in Burn will become easier to make, which will enable Ishmael, and her setup will be sped up due to getting her passive up faster, as you don't need to hold on to Liu Yisang's skill 3 for the eventual chain. Now, of course, we don't know anything about Middle Nurse Father Otis, and she already has tough competition in Magic Bullet, so really, I'm just coping here. Still, it's something worth keeping in mind, as Envy Burn seems to be some new team subtype that Project Moon are cooking up, with one of the Limbus Pass ego skills supporting it as well. This is why I don't really want to spend more time on looking at Ishmael in Burn, as it's clear that her finalized core isn't ready yet, and without that direct support, she just doesn't make it onto the team over any of the standing members. She does have Lust and Wrath though, which is nice, but no Pride is a bit of an issue. And finally, we can look at Envy Resonance, which is the middle composition. And it comes as a surprise to absolutely nobody that Kira Ishmael performs very well on this team specifically. Unlike the status teams we looked at previously, Envy Resonance lets Ishmael use the full power of her kit. The whole point of the team, as is evident by the name, is to create Envy Resonance chains, meaning that Ishmael gets plenty of opportunities to use her counter and turn it into her skill 3, dealing lots of damage and speeding up her setup. Speaking of her setup, Kira Ishmael is used alongside other middle units in this team, namely Sinclair and Merceau. And they also play around their counters, meaning Ishmael gets to stack up a lot of grudges when her allies get hit, and she can constantly consume them for quick augmentation tattoo gain. Ishmael's Burn Infliction is also quite nice for this team. Not because of the extra damage, as it's quite a small amount, but rather because Burn is a sticky status effect that doesn't lose its stack easily, meaning that Ishmael can actually achieve her coin power conditionals after 2 skill 3s, unlike Sinclair, who never gets extra coin power from his bleed conditionals. Another cool thing about this identity for the Envy Resonance team is her bonus damage. I didn't really say much about it beforehand, but every skill in Kira's kit has flat bonus damage that is tied to a damage type. This is pretty cool, as this kind of bonus damage gets modified by enemy resistances, meaning it's doubly effective against staggered targets, which is especially great with Violet Breaking Slam double dipping into enemy resistances with its bonus slash damage. The reason why I'm pointing this out here is the fact that the Envy Resonance composition is notoriously bad during stagger turns, as when a boss is at their most vulnerable, all your middle units lose access to their counters, which are the largest source of damage for these units. The bonus damage in Ishmael's kit seems to try and make it feel better to hit a staggered target in Envy Resonance now, which is much appreciated. The one issue I have with this ID on this team is her lack of a skill 2 activated through her counter. Being stuck in an all-or-nothing loop makes it harder to support Ishmael with units that have limited envy. The prime example of this is Sword Sharpened with Tears Rodion, who is an absolute physical powerhouse, but only has 33% envy uptime in her rotation, meaning she can screw up Ishmael's 6 absolute resonance requirement. This issue is made worse by the fact that Refraction Railway 5 is the best place to use Kira Ishmael in, and that mode is so old it still has only 6 sinners on the field. And Kim Ji-hoon fucking hates us, so there's no 6th railway, which means that using Ishmael and Rodion in that mode creates an anti-synergy, and that is quite sad. Overall though, Kira Ishmael is a unit that is very similar in power to Middle Sinclair, so she's an instant envy resonance mainstay, no doubt about it. Should you get this identity? Well, if you're looking to enhance your bleed or burn compositions, Ishmael is not really a unit worth investing in, at least not right now. But if you're a Chad Charge Envy enjoyer, absolutely do pick her up. She's a medal AD, and we all know where those shine. If you disagree or have something to add, feel free to leave a comment below, and I might read it and respond. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like to let me know, and if you want to see more like this, consider subscribing. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Goodbye!